Soft wind. A single match strikes. We hear it hiss out. Narrator, low, steady. They said she was born in the dark corner of a field where the wind never changed direction. The daughter of a woman who spoke to the moon and a man who vanished before sunrise. Celia wasn't supposed to exist. At least, that's what the plantation ledger said. No birth date. No baptism. Just a name scrawled in fading ink. Celia, property of Judge Creighton. In the daylight, she moved like a shadow, pouring water, polishing silver, sweeping dust from the feet of people who refused to look at her. But at night, when the others slept in the quarters, Celia spoke to someone who wasn't there. You promised, she'd whisper, staring into the fireplace. You said I'd never be alone. The house creaked, as if answering her. No one knows who taught her to read, or how she learned the old songs her mother hummed before the overseer silenced her. But the servants said Celia could hear what others couldn't. Whispers in the rafters, warnings in the storm. The judge called it insolence. The others called it witchcraft. One winter night, after a feast, the judge's laughter carried through the hall like something rotten. He was drunk. His voice, the same one that signed death warrants for men he'd never met, called Celia upstairs. That was the last night anyone heard him laugh. By morning, his study was empty, except for the smell of smoke and a trail of ash leading to the hearth. Celia was gone too. Only her bracelet remained, a braided thread, still warm, and smeared with what looked like soot. The judge is missing, they whispered, and the girl in the ashes took him. Music rises, low drums, cold wind. The camera pans across the burned fireplace, a faint heartbeat under the score. Narrator. But this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a curse that would haunt the family for generations. A curse born not from magic, but from the quiet revenge of a woman who are. Distant thunder. A quill scratches across parchment. The camera lingers on an old letter, stained with candle soot. Narrator, low, deliberate. The judge's disappearance should have been a scandal. But in Creighton County, justice only existed when the powerful demanded it, and silence was easier to buy than truth. The morning after he vanished, the sheriff rode to the plantation. He found the servants trembling, the air still thick with smoke. Celia's quarters had been stripped bare. Not a dress, not a blanket, not a trace of her scent. Yet the walls, they were marked. Black streaks of ash spiraled in patterns no one could explain. Some said they looked like fingerprints. Others swore they formed words in a language no one dared to read. The sheriff wanted to speak to the family, but the judge's eldest son, Thomas Creighton, stepped forward before he could. There'll be no investigation, he said. My father's gone to the city on business. He burned the sheriff's notes in front of everyone. The townsfolk nodded, pretended to believe it, because Thomas owned the land, the church, and most of their debts. But the story spread anyway. A servant claimed she saw Celia standing by the edge of the swamp that night, holding something that shimmered in the dark. Another swore that when he looked in her eyes, he saw the judge's reflection, his mouth open, screaming. By spring, the fields refused to grow. Livestock fell ill. The Creighton name began to rot like fruit in the sun. It's her, they whispered. The girl in the ashes. She cursed them, but no one ever found her body. No court ever called her name. No priest ever prayed for her soul. A pause. The wind picks up again, faint echoes of church bells in the distance. Narrator. History called it a disappearance. But families like the Creightons knew better. Some sins don't fade. They echo. They wait. Fade to black. A soft heartbeat, then silence. Night. A single candle flickers on an ornate desk. The camera drifts through the shadows of a decaying plantation house. Narrator, low, intimate. It began with the sound of footsteps. Not outside the door, inside his mind. Thomas Creighton inherited everything his father left behind. The land, the money, and the silence. But wealth couldn't drown the whispers that followed him wherever he went. He stopped sleeping first, then eating. Then he stopped opening the curtains because he swore every time he did, he saw her, standing just beyond the tree line. The girl in the ashes. At night, the servants heard him pacing through the halls, muttering to himself. I did what I had to. She was nothing. She was nothing. But the shadows disagreed. They shifted when he spoke, curling against the walls, crawling closer each night. The family physician called it guilt. A fever of the mind, he said. But Thomas insisted the judge was still in the house. He claimed he could hear his father's voice echoing through the fireplace, not calling for help, but laughing. A low rumble. The candle flares, then dies out. The servants began leaving one by one. They said the house reeked of burnt flesh, that every mirror showed something different. Not reflections, but fragments. A face half screaming, half smiling, hidden behind soot. By midsummer, Thomas was alone. The fields were barren, the house hollow, and yet the fireplace never went cold. One night, a rider passing through the valley claimed to see a glow from the upper windows. Not candlelight, but fire. When he reached the gates, the house was dark again. But on the front steps lay a single object, a woman's bracelet. Braided thread, soot-stained. Narrator, quietly. He tried to burn what he couldn't bury. But some things don't die in the flames. They're born in them. Music swells, distant choir, slow heartbeat, then silence. Dust motes swirl in a shaft of light. The sound of a door creaking open, old hinges crying out after decades of silence. Narrator, soft, reverent, almost a whisper. When the house finally passed to the next generation, the Creighton estate was already a ruin of whispers and rot. But what they found in the attic rewrote the family's history. In 1894, nearly 40 years after Thomas Creighton's death, his nephew Edward came to settle the property. He was a man of science, skeptical, proud, and obsessed with order. The kind of man who believed every superstition had a rational explanation. Until the second week. The housekeeper, a local woman named Ruth, refused to enter the attic. She said it was where the eyes watched. Edward laughed, until he went up there himself. The door was nailed shut from the outside. The nails were rusted, driven in at strange angles, like someone had sealed something in, not out. He pried it open. The air that escaped was thick and cold, the kind that smells of rain, even when there's no storm. Inside was a single object under a white cloth. A portrait, huge, unmarked. He pulled back the sheet and froze. It was his uncle, Thomas, sitting in the judge's chair, staring straight ahead. But behind him, half hidden in shadow, was another figure, a woman. Her face almost vanished in the soot-colored background, except for her eyes. They were burning. Edward called it a trick of the paint. But when he turned to leave, the eyes seemed to follow him. That night, he brought the painting downstairs. By morning, the frame had cracked in half, and the servants swore they heard a woman humming through the vents. A faint melody drifts through, slow, haunting, like a lullaby warped by distance. Narrator, lower now. Every family paints its own portrait of truth, but some brushstrokes are written in blood. The candlelight fades. The humming continues for a few seconds after the visuals cut to black. Low thunder. The sound of paper crinkling. A candle flickers against a wall lined with ledgers and seals. Narrator, measured, deliberate. Edward Creighton thought he could reason with ghosts. That logic could dissolve what madness had built. But in his search for order, he found a record that should never have existed. He discovered it while cataloging his uncle's old desk, a compartment beneath the false drawer, sealed with wax and bound by twine. Inside were documents older than the plantation itself. Contracts, receipts, and one parchment marked with a single phrase written in a trembling hand. The Bloodline Agreement, 1829. At first glance, it looked like any other plantation deed. But there were things that didn't make sense. A second signature beside the judge's, scrawled in a darker ink that had never faded. No name, no title, just a symbol. A loop of ash and thread, identical to the bracelet found in the fireplace decades earlier. Payment in kind, the document read. In exchange for prosperity, land, and heirs, the judge pledges the soul of his firstborn to the keeper of the ashes. Edward felt his blood run cold. It wasn't a business deal. It was a pact. He flipped through more papers, old journals, court notices, letters from preachers begging the judge to repent. The story became clear. Celia's mother, once enslaved on the property, had been more than a servant. She had been the one who kept the fields alive during the Great Drought by performing rituals the judge had forbidden, then secretly begged for when his crops began to die. But the price of her help was binding. And when he broke his word, when he sold her child, the balance had to be restored. Edward slammed the chest shut, but it was too late. Something had already noticed him. Wind rushes through the cracks in the windows. The candle trembles violently. A whisper slides through the room, faint, almost tender. The debt is not paid. He turned toward the sound, "Bu." The sound of rain dripping through a cracked roof. The camera drifts through the abandoned hallways of the Creighton house, lights slicing through the darkness in trembling beams. Narrator soft, slow, almost prayer-like. Every curse has a keeper. Not a ghost, not a demon. Something older, a balance that never forgets. Edward Creighton stopped writing letters after the 5th week. His handwriting had become erratic, almost desperate. The servants said he'd taken to walking the fields at night, muttering to the soil as if expecting it to answer. He burned sage. He hung crosses. He invited priests. None of it worked, because the thing haunting him didn't live in the walls. It lived in the blood. It started small. The taste of ash in his food. The smell of smoke clinging to his clothes, no matter how many times he bathed. Then came the dreams, the same one, every night. A field of black soil. A woman standing in it, waist deep, her eyes the color of dying embers. In her hand, a thread braided from human hair and something that shimmered like silver dust. "Your family made me the keeper," she whispered. "Now you'll feed what they owed." Edward would wake gasping, his mouth dry, his hands trembling, and always a thin streak of soot along his throat, like the touch of something unseen. By the 3rd month, his reflection no longer matched his face. He said it blinked when he didn't. A mirror creaks. A faint figure moves within the glass, blurred, feminine. He tried to burn the contract, but the parchment refused to catch fire. The ink bubbled, blackened, and then reformed, the words glowing faintly red. "The debt is not paid," it read again. That was the last line in his journal. 2 days later, the housekeeper found the study empty, the window open, the chair toppled, and a trail of soot leading to the fireplace. Inside, among the cold ashes, lay Edward's pocket watch, still ticking. Narrator, quietly. Some said he fled the country. A gramophone hums softly in the background, a warped waltz spinning under the static. The screen flickers to an old black-and-white photograph of a woman standing before a ruined mansion. Narrator, measured, almost mournful. 40 years after Edward Creighton vanished, the last of the bloodline returned home. Her name was Eleanor. She had never seen the house, only heard whispers from family who refused to speak its name. Raised in the city, educated, skeptical. But when the telegram came announcing she was the estate's sole heir, she felt something stir inside her, a pull she couldn't explain. When her carriage arrived, the driver refused to go beyond the gates. "The road ends here," he muttered. "It always has." So she walked, through overgrown fields and silent woods, until the house appeared, half collapsed, half alive. Windows boarded, vines crawling through broken glass. Inside, dust coated everything. Furniture shrouded in white sheets. The air smelled faintly of rain and smoke. And somewhere deep within the walls, something moved, a slow exhale like the house itself was breathing. Eleanor spent her first night in the master bedroom. She dreamed of fire, a woman standing in a circle of ash, her face hidden, her voice saying, "You came back to finish what they started." When she woke, her hands were covered in soot. The sound of the gramophone stops abruptly, a needle scrape, then silence. Over the next week, she began exploring. In the attic, she found the cracked portrait her uncle had written about, the one with the burning eyes. But now, the woman's face was no longer hidden in shadow. The paint had changed. It looked exactly like Eleanor. Soft strings began rising, a heartbeat rhythm beneath them. She tried to rationalize it. Oil warps over time, she told herself. Moisture, decay, coincidence. But then, she found something beneath the frame, a strip of parchment folded into the backing. On it were 6 words, written in TR. Rain pours outside. The camera glides slowly through the darkened corridors of Creighton House. The light from Eleanor's lantern trembles across the rotting wallpaper. Narrator, quiet, heavy with unease. The house was built on a secret, and secrets, like graves, eventually shift until what's buried begins to breathe. Eleanor woke one night to a sound beneath the floor. Not rats, not the house settling. A voice. At first, it was just a murmur, a faint, rhythmic whisper rising from the boards below her bed. It came every night at the same hour, 3:11 a.m. The same hour, the old records later revealed, that her ancestor Thomas Creighton had died. She pressed her ear to the wood. The whisper grew clearer. A woman's voice, cracked, sorrowful, repeating one phrase over and over again. "I kept my promise. Will you?" Eleanor ripped up the rug. Beneath it, she found an uneven plank sealed with pitch. When she pried it loose, a rush of air escaped, cold, damp, and filled with the faint smell of soot. Inside was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. She hesitated, then descended. The soundscape shifts, her breathing echoes off stone. The lantern flame flickers. The air grows heavier. At the bottom was a chamber, walls blackened by fire, the floor covered in fine gray ash. In the center stood an iron bowl, long cooled. Inside it lay fragments of bone, half buried, and beside it, a single thread bracelet, braided and soot-stained. Eleanor reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers brushed the thread, the air changed. The ashes stirred, slowly, then violently, swirling into a spiral that rose toward her face. She heard the voice again, no longer a whisper. "You carry his blood. You carry his death." The lantern shattered. Darkness. A long pause. Then, faintly, the sound of someone breathing beside her. When she woke, she was back in her room. The floorboards had been replaced. The rug, perfectly aligned. The only proof that she'd. Soft, dripping water. The faint buzz of flies. A cracked mirror catches slivers of light from Eleanor's candle. Narrator, quiet, drawn out, almost tender. First, she stopped recognizing her own eyes. Then, she stopped trusting what they saw. For days after finding the chamber, Eleanor tried to convince herself she'd dreamed it. Exhaustion, grief, superstition. But every night, new soot appeared beneath her nails, no matter how many times she washed her hands. And then, one morning, she saw it. In the mirror. At first, nothing was wrong. Her face, her expression, her breath fogging the glass. But when she blinked, the reflection didn't. It watched her. Eleanor froze. Her reflection began to smile, slow, deliberate, with lips that moved a fraction out of sync. Then it whispered without sound. "He called me nothing." She stumbled back, shattering the mirror with a candlestick. But when the shards hit the floor, each one reflected the same image. Not her, but a woman in ashes. A rising hum fills the silence, like a choir breathing in unison. The next day, Eleanor covered every mirror in the house with cloth. She avoided her reflection, windows, silverware, even the dark surface of a lake behind the estate. But that didn't stop her from looking back. At night, the cloths would be pulled down, the mirrors uncovered. And every time Eleanor woke, she saw faint fingerprints on the glass. Long, narrow, like someone had been pressing from the inside. Wind moans through broken shutters. The camera pans across mirrors covered in gray sheets, each one faintly moving, as if something beneath them is breathing. Eleanor began hearing her voice call out from empty rooms, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, sometimes whispering her own name, the way her mother used to when she was a child. Narrator, low, steady. A curse doesn't haunt a place. It haunts a reflection, the image of what the soul refuses to face. That night, she uncovered the mirror. A low hum of wind through hollow walls. Faint embers drift upward in the darkness, like ghosts pretending to be light. Narrator, measured, reverent. Fire doesn't destroy what it touches. It remembers it. Every flame keeps a memory of what it once consumed. After the mirror shattered, Eleanor locked herself inside the study. The the same room where Edward Creighton disappeared generations earlier. She read through his journals, desperate for logic, for pattern, for control. But the words changed as she read them. Whole sentences rearranged themselves on the page, twisting into something new. "The keeper is not bound by death," one line said. "She is the dead itself." Eleanor began to understand. Celia, the girl in the ashes, had not vanished. She had become something. Not a ghost, not vengeance, but an ancient balance. The embodiment of the promise the judge broke. That night, the fireplaces across the house all ignited at once. Flames roaring high, though no matches were struck. The air filled with the smell of rain and burning cedar. And through the firelight, shapes moved, faint silhouettes, dozens of them, circling the hearths. The past had come home. "You think this house is stone and timber," the voice said, soft, everywhere at once. "But it's made of what they did to me." Eleanor fell to her knees. The ash on the floor began to move, swirling around her, clinging to her skin like a living thing. It burned cold. The sound of heartbeats, slow and irregular. Fire crackles in sync with them. When she looked down, the ash had formed words on the floorboards. "You are the last. Pay it." Eleanor screamed that she wasn't her ancestors, that she hadn't done anything. But the flames didn't care about names. Only blood. The portraits on the walls began to blacken, one by one, faces melting into shadow. The house groaned, the wood splintering like bones, cracking under pressure. And beneath the sound of the fire came another, a heartbeat. No. Low strings hum. The air feels heavier. A candle flickers, then extinguishes itself. We hear Eleanor's breath, shallow, trembling. Narrator, measured, reverent. Some faces are not seen. They are remembered. And when memory refuses to die, it wears flesh again. The house was breathing, walls expanding and contracting as if the very structure had lungs. The sound came from deep inside, beneath the floorboards, through the old chimney flues, and down the hall where the portraits hung like sentinels. Eleanor followed it, candle in hand, to the east corridor, the one room that had been nailed shut since her childhood. Her grandmother had called it the judge's room, but the servants had another name. They called it the mouth of the house. The door opened easily now. The air inside was damp, thick with soot. In the center stood a mirror taller than any person, its surface gray, rippling like smoke caught between two worlds. As she approached, her reflection didn't appear, only darkness. Then, slowly, a figure emerged within it, a woman standing in shadow, her dress made of burned lace and ash that moved like fog around her feet. Her eyes were not hollow. They were alive. Celia, whispering. "You were their name." Eleanor couldn't breathe. She wanted to speak, but her voice broke in her throat. "Celia, he promised me freedom. He gave me fire. Now you will give me the rest." The mirror pulsed like it had a heartbeat. Ash began to rise off the floor again, swirling around Eleanor's ankles, climbing higher, forming thin black tendrils that touched her skin. They didn't burn. They remembered her. Visions flooded her mind, flashes of that night long ago. The judge's hands gripping Celia's arms. The terrified servants watching from the doorway. And a whisper, "Make her silent." Eleanor screamed, and the images shattered. But when she opened her eyes again, Celia was no longer in the mirror. She was standing behind her. Narrator, low, trembling. The low, pulsing wind. The faint crackle of embers dying out. The camera lingers on Eleanor and Celia, one of blood, one of ash, standing face to face in the dim orange light. Narrator, measured, steady. Every curse begins as a promise. Every haunting as a debt unpaid. The mirror behind them rippled again, its surface flickering like water under firelight. Within it, the past played on repeat. The judge's final night, the screams, the fire, the silence that followed. Eleanor finally understood. The Creightons hadn't been cursed for what they did that night. They were cursed for what they refused to remember. Celia, softly. "He made me kneel. He said the law was his. So I made a law of my own." The air around her shimmered, and Eleanor saw faint symbols. the same ones scorched into the old walls of the slave quarters centuries ago, burning across the floor. It wasn't witchcraft. It was binding, a pact written in blood and smoke. Celia stepped closer. Her face was calm, no longer twisted by fury, but heavy with the kind of sadness that only time could sharpen into mercy. Celia, I wanted them to feel what I did, to know that silence is a wound that never stops bleeding. Eleanor's candle flickered. The air smelled of rain again, like the night before the fire. Eleanor, then take me. End it. Celia shook her head. You are not them, but you carry their shadow. You cannot erase it. You can only rewrite it. Thunder outside. The mirror begins to hum, like a voice rising from beneath the earth. The flames around them bent inward, circling the two women in light. The ash on the floor lifted, spinning into words that glowed faintly before burning away. One life to remember. One life to release. Eleanor understood. One of them had to stay. The other had to let go. Narrator, soft, heavy. 4 generations. The Creightons had tried to bury the truth. But truth doesn't die when you burn it. It waits for someone brave enough to speak its name. Celia placed H. Soft church bells toll. The scene opens on Creighton County years later. Fog draped over sagging rooftops. The church spire cracked but still standing. Narrator, measured, bitter. People never fear the truth itself. They fear what the truth might demand of them. In the months after the fire, no one visited the ruins of the Creighton estate. They said the ground was poisoned, that smoke still rose at night, that the girl who lived there had gone wrong, a polite way of saying possessed. The sheriff wrote the report himself. Lightning strike, accidental blaze. No foul play suspected. Signed, sealed, forgotten. But old women in the market whispered otherwise. They said the Creighton heir had been talking to the dead, that she'd tried to summon her family's ghosts, and the fire was God's punishment. The kind of story people tell to feel safe, as if damnation were something you had to earn, not inherit. Eleanor disappeared not long after. Some said she left for the city. Others swore they saw her walking into the swamp at dusk, barefoot, carrying a single candle. No one followed her. No one ever saw her again. A soft rustle of leaves. The wind carries faint whispers, almost like laughter. Years passed. The estate decayed, sinking into the earth. Trees grew through the foundations, their roots wrapping around the bones of the house. Children were warned never to go near it, not because of ghosts, but because stories grow wild there. And once they catch you, they don't let go. And still, every generation had one child, one curious enough to walk to the edge of the old property, to look out across the black water of the swamp, and swear they saw a woman's silhouette standing motionless in the mist. Narrator, lower, colder. The town told itself she was a warning. But warnings are only for those who plan to stop. And no one in Creighton County ever truly stopped forgetting. The church bells fade. In the distance, thunder rolls. The swamp remains. Rain falls in heavy sheets over Creighton County, turning dirt paths to rivers of mud. A lone carriage bumps along the old road. Narrator, cold, deliberate. Curiosity is a dangerous companion. Those who chase the past often find it chasing them in return. A man arrives, suitcase in hand. His name is Jonathan Hale, historian, genealogist, and obsessive in the way men become when they sense a story the world refuses to tell. He has read the journals, the burned letters, the police reports that should have warned him off. He steps off the carriage and looks across the swamp. The Creighton estate is gone. Just scorched earth, the twisted skeleton of blackened timbers, trees like charred sentinels rising from the ruins. But Jonathan feels it immediately, a presence. Not malevolent, not kind, simply watching. The townspeople avoid him. They warn him in careful tones. Some doors, sir, when opened, cannot be closed. Jonathan smiles politely, ignoring them. Every warning is fuel. Every fearful glance, an invitation. He sets up camp near the old foundations, pulling notebooks, lanterns, and camera equipment from his bags. He intends to record, document, and catalog, to make sense of a place where sense has never belonged. On the second night, he hears it, Soft scratching. Footsteps over dry wood that should not exist. A whisper in the wind, almost human, saying something just beyond comprehension. He dismisses it at first. The swamp plays tricks, but the sound persists, deliberate, patient, watching him. He begins finding items, objects buried shallowly beneath soil and moss. A child's shoe, scorched at the toe, a doll missing one eye. Journals filled with handwriting that shifts mid-page as if the pen itself has a mind. The letters speak of debts, scales, justice, revenge, and knowledge that cannot be surrendered. Jonathan becomes obsessed. Sleep eludes him. The swamp's mist presses against his tent at night, and in it, faces, old, young, angry, grieving. Inside Jonathan's tent, lantern light flickers against yellowed pages. Rain pounds the canvas, relentless. He opens a thick, leather-bound book, the ledger. Narrator, gritty, whispering. A ledger is more than numbers, more than ink on paper. It is a memory, a reckoning, a sentence that waits to be read. The ledger is precise. Every line records a life, a transaction, a choice. Names, dates, circumstances, some banal, some horrifying. But the handwriting shifts as if alive. The letters grow darker at the edges, curling like smoke, spelling warnings Jonathan cannot ignore. He reads, March 14th, 1843, debt settled. One soul owed, claim unresolved. June 2nd, 1850, child removed from lineage. Compensation required. October 31st, 1876, balance unsettled. Witnesses remain. Jonathan's pulse quickens. This is not merely a historical record. It is a moral ledger, a ledger of debts accrued, reckoned, and punished. The swamp outside shifts. Mist coils like serpents around dead trees. He hears the scratching again, this time near the edges of his tent. He writes furiously in his notebook. This is not bookkeeping. This is justice, and justice is patient. Every entry begins to feel like a prophecy. Jonathan begins to understand. The ledger chooses who will live and who will vanish, not through human hands, but through memory, observation, and consequence. He turns a page. One name jumps off the paper, Jonathan Hale, written in jagged, almost violent strokes alongside a date that is today. Narrator, low, relentless. History does not forgive the curious. Curiosity is a debt, and some debts are eternal. Jonathan drops the ledger. The shadow figure from the swamp appears at the tent flap. Closer, silent, waiting. Narrator, ominous. Some truths cannot be recorded. They can only be lived and repaid. Camera pans out. The rain intensifies. The ledger lies open on the muddy ground, pages fluttering as if turning themselves. The swamp seems to inhale. Night has fallen. The swamp is alive with distant croaks and snapping branches. Jonathan holds the ledger, trembling, as the shadows press closer. Narrator, low, commanding. Every action, every thought, every glance has a cost. Every debt, recorded in silence, waits until the scales are tipped. Jonathan can feel it now, the weight of unseen eyes, not just from the living, but from something older, something patient. The ledger isn't just a record of the past. It is a conduit, a mechanism that calls forth consequence. He reads aloud one entry, voice shaking. January 3rd, 1865, balance unsettled. One wrong decision can undo all. The words echo through the swamp, swallowed and returned, distorted. The air grows thick, humid, almost suffocating. The shadows seem to move in time with his heartbeat. Narrator, sharper, insistent. You thought knowledge was power. You thought seeing the truth made you free. But knowledge is a debt, and freedom is earned in fear and patience. Jonathan's hands are covered in ink now. The ledger has bled onto his fingers, as if marking him for the judgment to come. He can feel the moment of settlement approaching, though he cannot see it. A whisper brushes against his ear. Not human, not quite. Do you understand now the cost? Every memory of those lost, every life erased, every act of silence, it converges. The ledger was never his to read. It was a mirror, a reflection of everything hidden: corruption, greed, ignorance, cruelty, fear. He falls to his knees. The ledger rests on the mud before him. He sees the first names he ever thought irrelevant: neighbors, friends, strangers, etched beside dates that have not yet arrived. The ledger stretches beyond the physical pages. It is alive. Narrator, dark, relentless. And now, the reckoning begins. The ledger calls, and every man must answer. Jonathan knows he cannot run. He cannot hide. The debts are not negotiable. The ledger waits. His life, his duh. Dawn breaks over the swamp, gray and heavy. Jonathan sits before the ledger, trembling, rain dripping from his hair, the air thick with a sense of finality. Narrator, dark, commanding. Some knowledge is a curse. Some truths are forged to break the unprepared. And now you see what lies behind the curtain, what has always been there, watching, waiting, balancing. Jonathan opens the ledger once more. The pages shift as though alive, letters bleeding into new names, new events. The ledger does not merely record, it dictates. Every word, every choice, every omission ripples forward. Every act of ignorance or malice has consequences. He reads the final lines aloud. The scales are set. The debt collector waits. Those who understood survived. Those who did not are already claimed. The swamp shivers. Jonathan feels a presence at his back. Not human, not entirely. Something elemental, something patient. It is the ledger itself, the accumulated weight of centuries of knowledge, cruelty, and secrecy. Narrator, relentless, hypnotic. Do you understand now? This is the price of seeing. This is the burden of truth. You can never unsee what has been revealed. You can never return to ignorance. You are no longer the man who stumbled across the ledger. You are now a keeper, a witness, and a participant. Jonathan stands. The ledger closes itself with a final, resonant thump. His hands are ink-stained. His heart pounds with fear and understanding. He knows the ledger's power is not neutral. It chooses who will live, who will fall, and who will inherit the weight of its knowledge. He steps away, the swamp quiet now, the air clear but heavy with inevitability. Every shadow, every rustle of wind through the trees, whispers, the ledger remembers. The ledger judges. Narrator, intensifying, almost hypnotic. Remember this, and repeat it aloud. The scales are balanced. The debt is paid. Say it twice. Let the words sink into your bones. Let them mark you. This is not